I was alone at a petrol pump at 1 a.m., 3 men circling me like I was prey, and I was pretending to look at my phone like that would save me. It didn't. He did. And I spent the next 8 months wishing he hadn't, because falling for someone that steady when you're that broken is its own kind of danger. If you've ever had someone walk into your life at exactly the wrong time and still become the best thing in it, stay with me. And if this story hits you somewhere real, hit that subscribe button. I promise, every story I share is worth your time. My name is Zoe Callahan. I'm 27 years old, I design buildings for a living, and until about 11 months ago, I genuinely believed I was fine. Not happy, exactly, but fine. Functioning. Paying my bills, showing up to work, smiling at the right moments. I'd just ended a 3-year relationship with a man named Declan, and I'd convinced myself that the hollow feeling in my chest was just the natural aftermath of a breakup, not a sign that something in me had quietly gone dark. I was wrong about that, but I didn't know it yet. The night everything changed, I had worked 14 hours straight on a harbor renovation project my firm had just landed. It was the kind of exhaustion that sits behind your eyes and makes everything feel slightly unreal. I stopped at a petrol pump on Route 9, the one just past the old cannery, if you know this town, because my tank was nearly empty and I still had 20 minutes of driving ahead of me. It was 1 a.m. The forecourt was empty and bright under those flat white lights, and I remember thinking how strange it was that a place could feel so exposed and so lonely at the same time. They pulled in while I was still at the pump. 3 men in a modified pickup, music loud, and at first I thought nothing of it. People stop for petrol. That's a normal thing. But then the music cut off, and one of them got out, and the way he walked toward me, slow, deliberate, like he had all the time in the world, made every hair on my arms stand up. He leaned against the pump next to mine and said, "You here alone?" Not as a question, as a fact he was confirming for himself. The other 2 got out of the truck. They didn't come closer, but they didn't have to. They just stood there, and that was enough. I went very still. Not frozen, still. The way prey goes still. I was scrolling through my contacts, trying to figure out who I could call at 1 a.m. who would actually pick up, and the answer was nobody, and I think that loneliness hit me harder in that moment than the fear did. Then a black truck pulled into the forecourt. He got out without hurrying. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a worn jacket, and he moved with the kind of quiet that you don't see very often. The kind that comes from someone who has been in genuinely dangerous situations and learned not to waste energy on performance. He walked to the pump beside mine, glanced once at the 3 men and said, completely calmly, "You guys need something?" 4 words. That was it. And they left, just got back in their truck and drove away like the whole thing had been nothing, because to him, it clearly was. I was shaking, hands, knees, the works, but quietly, the way you shake when the adrenaline has nowhere to go. He looked at me once. "You all right?" And I said yes, because I was embarrassed and raw and didn't know what else to say. He nodded and turned to walk back to his truck, and I heard myself say, "Thank you," and he looked back over his shoulder and said, "Go straight home. Don't stop anywhere else tonight." Then he got in his truck and drove away. I sat in my car for a full 2 minutes before I could make myself move. I didn't even know his name, but I thought about those 4 words for 3 days like they were something I'd needed to hear for a long time. I met him again exactly 1 week later, which I still can't fully explain without sounding like I believe in things I'm not sure I believe in. My firm had been hired to redesign the old harbor district, and there was a community planning meeting I was required to attend. He was there representing the local fire station, reviewing structural plans for safety compliance. I recognized him before he recognized me, and I spent the first 10 minutes of that meeting deciding not to say anything. He sat 2 seats away and read the documents with a mechanical pencil, actually making notes, and when I presented my firm's preliminary sketches, he raised his hand and asked one single precise question about fire egress in the central structure, a question my senior partner, who had 20 years on me, hadn't thought to ask. After the meeting, in the parking lot, he caught my eye and I watched it click. "Petrol pump," he said, and I laughed, a real laugh, the first one I'd had in weeks, and he looked almost surprised by it, like he hadn't expected that sound from me. We talked for 20 minutes. His name was Noah Hart. He'd served 2 tours overseas and come back to his hometown to be close to his younger sister Piper, who had a degenerative joint condition. He didn't say it like a sad story. He said it the way you'd state any fact about your life that you'd simply decided to build around. And it hit me harder because of how plainly he said it. Before we parted ways, he looked at my portfolio folder and said, "I can tell you're an architect. You looked at that building's bones before you looked at the walls." I didn't know what to do with someone who noticed things like that. Over the next 6 weeks, we kept crossing paths at the harbor project. Site visits, compliance walkthroughs, planning sessions. Small things accumulated. He brought me coffee on a cold morning without asking how I took it and somehow got it exactly right. I stayed late one evening walking him through a structural concern he'd flagged, and we talked until the building's custodian had to ask us to leave. I met Piper, his sister. 22, uses a cane and has the loudest laugh of anyone I've ever met. She liked me immediately. I could see it mattered to Noah. But I was still carrying Declan, not in the way you carry someone you love, in the way you carry damage you haven't fully named yet. Declan had been magnetic, socially brilliant, the kind of man who made you feel chosen in public and invisible in private. I'd spent 3 years slowly disappearing inside that relationship and told myself it was love. Noah was nothing like that. He was just present, genuinely, completely present, and that terrified me more than Declan ever had, because I didn't know what to do with someone who took up exactly the space he occupied and no more. One evening at the harbor, sitting on a half-built wall with the water going dark in front of us, Noah said something quiet and honest about coming home after war and finding your hometown both smaller and more precious than you remembered. I looked at him and almost said something true. Instead, I said I should get going, and he nodded, and that was it. No push, no wounded look, just acceptance. I hated him for it a little, because I wanted him to push, and I wouldn't have known what to do if he had. Then Declan called. He missed me. He was considering moving back. He sounded like the version of himself I had originally fallen for, and I listened for 40 minutes and felt the pull of the familiar like a current under cold water. I didn't say yes to anything, but I didn't say no either, and when I showed up to the next site meeting, I was somewhere else entirely. Noah noticed. He always noticed. At the end of the meeting, he asked quietly if I was okay. I said yes too fast, and he said, so gently, it undid something in me. "You don't have to tell me, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't matter to me what you decide." And I kissed him. Once. Carefully. He didn't pull back, but he said, "Not like this, not while you're still figuring out someone else." He turned me down to protect me from a version of this that I would have regretted. I didn't know whether to respect him for it or scream. I went back to Declan anyway. I told myself it was closure. I requested a different site liaison at work so I wouldn't have to see Noah. I watched myself slowly become smaller again, the quiet dismissals dressed as jokes, the particular silence that follows when you see something you're proud of and the other person just moves on. I stayed for 2 months, waiting to feel at home. And then one night, Declan made a careless comment about my work, and I heard it with completely new ears. I left. Not for Noah. I need you to understand that. I left because I had finally learned what it felt like to be seen, and I couldn't unknow it. I went back to the harbor project. Noah was professional, polite, careful. The warmth was still there, but held back, and I understood why. I didn't make a speech. I just showed up and waited. And then Piper told me over coffee one afternoon, almost casually like she assumed I already knew, that Noah had been offered a long-term overseas contract with a disaster response unit, that he'd turned it down months ago, and then taken it last month. He was leaving in 3 weeks. I found him at the harbor at dusk. I didn't ask him to stay. I just said, I needed you to know you were right. About all of it. I'm sorry it took me so long to be sure. He set his papers down, looked at the water, then said, 3 weeks is still 3 weeks. Those 3 weeks were the most honest of my life. No grand gestures, just dinners and long walks and conversations that ran past midnight. The night before he left, he said, I don't want you to wait for me. I want you to be okay while I'm gone. There's a difference. And I said, I know, I'll be okay, but I'll also be here. He left, and I watched his truck disappear, and I didn't cry. Not because it didn't hurt, but because it didn't feel like loss. It felt like the beginning of something I was finally, actually ready for. People talk about love like it's about finding someone, but what Noah gave me wasn't rescue, not even at that petrol pump. What he gave me was the first real proof that I was worth being steady for, that I didn't have to earn it or perform it or shrink myself to deserve it. And sometimes the most profound love story isn't the one that sweeps you off your feet. It's the one that quietly, firmly, puts you back on them. If any part of this felt like something you've lived or something you're still hoping for, tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if you're new here, please subscribe because I pour everything into these stories. See you in the next one.